Hi everyone, it's Swank Ivy with another Letters to an Asexual. This is number 111. Today's letter is going to be based on some comments that I got on an article that I wrote a long while back for the magazine Psychology Today online. And this is about some of the dangers associated with leaning on supposed norms in relationships to organize how your expectations of sexual activity and sexual intimacy within relationships are expected to be. The gist of this is that a man in my comments wanted me to understand that men who are not asexual can never date an asexual woman. And I have some rather nuanced conversations in the comments to share with you. I don't need to outline them before I go into it because it's pretty well explained in the conversation itself why this doesn't get at the center of why we need to have these conversations and why activism needs to address the importance of this, of not expecting there to be one answer for every kind of relationship or any hard and fast rules besides everyone in the relationship respecting each other. So, here we go. Someone named Eric commented on a Psychology Today article I had written about relationships and also the importance of mainstream mental health practitioners and physical health practitioners learning more about asexuality so that they don't accidentally recommend inappropriate therapies for asexual people on the assumption that you should always be trying to fix asexual people and push them toward more sex or more normalized understandings of sexual relationships, as if that's always going to be the best thing to do with any relationship. So this person wrote this, and I will say that this is a little more nuanced, a little bit more accepting than most of these kinds of people are, but it's still dangerous for reasons you will see. So this person says this: if you're truly happy the way you are, I wouldn't try to change you. Honest, but I wouldn't date you, and I wouldn't marry you, and I would discourage any male friend of mine from doing so. It's fine if you're not interested in sex. If you'd rather watch TV, read a book, or play Parcheesi than have sex, then by all means, do what you enjoy, and don't let anyone tell you there's anything wrong with that. But sex is important to most people. Note that I didn't say it's important to normal people. There is absolutely no possible compromise that you could work out with a man who has an average libido. There's no alternative brand of intimacy that most of us would find acceptable. Now, if you have no desire for a boyfriend or husband, there's no problem. But if you want a boyfriend or a husband, you have only two options: seek out an asexual male or learn to enjoy sex. Here's my response. Personally, I'm aromantic and non-partner seeking, so I have no position in this race, but I think many people in my community would have a huge bone to pick with what you've said here. It's incredible how often people, often women, in relationships with a mismatch of sexual desire are treated like they are unreasonable, and the only option is for them to change. They're treated like they are a thing to be silenced or fixed, instead of, half the relationship with desires that are equally important. You're right, sex is very important to many people, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if the difference in sexual interest and desire is mismatched to the point that it's a deal breaker, the best thing to do is break the deal, not insist that the less sex-desiring person is the only one who should ever be asked to work on changing what they want in a relationship. Relationships like this have different levels of sexual inclination. Not one person wants sex too much or one person wants sex too little. I would respectfully request that you stop speaking for all men of average to high libido and listen. You left a key piece dangling in your comment, a supposition that there's no alternative intimacy that most would accept. Please do our community a favor and downgrade that to some, and then please refrain from reinforcing it. Because as a person who's heard hundreds of dialogues on asexual relationships from real people, and even given a 60-minute guest lecture on the topic at University of Virginia, I know from experience that not only do asexual/non-asexual relationships have the capacity to work out fine, but that it's a common misconception that sex is the defining factor in whether a relationship works. I have talked to several dozen non-asexual people who out and out say they absolutely would stay with their partner even if they couldn't have sex as much or at all. Some of them were men. Some of them said they have a pretty strong sex drive, and some of them said their relationship gave them other things they craved as much or more, which they weren't willing to sacrifice over getting their way with sex. There are non-penetrative sex options, other physically and sexually intimate activities, other aspects of emotional and physical closeness, and even non-monogamies that can be considered in cases where a partner wants sexual needs met. It is so far from the black and white, date asexual men or have sex, period, hardline stance you have offered above. And for the record, I have heard people who aren't men insist that sex is vital in a relationship. It's not just men who feel this way sometimes, and I do know asexual people who have and enjoy sex. Asexuality is often misunderstood as abstinence, and it's a popular misconception that people stop being asexual if they have sex. No. For some people, just have sex. Do it for the relationship. It's no big deal, and you're selfish if you don't, is just as unreasonable as just go without sex. Do it for the relationship. It's no big deal, and you're selfish if you won't. We'd like to work toward an understanding that acknowledges asexuality's legitimacy, so people will stop claiming they must always be the ones to accommodate everyone else, without their partners having to challenge any assumptions or make any changes. You can and should speak for yourself on what you want. There is no problem at all with considering sex vital in a relationship. The problem begins when you speak for others of your gender and reinforce the message that sex is inevitable in every relationship with a man unless he is also asexual. Let the people in those relationships decide that. Many of them already have, and their conclusion is not what you say. And someone named Clara in the comments replied to Eric to say that she prefers romantic relationships and doesn't want anything sexual, and reiterated that, some men do exist who don't insist on sex, even if they're not asexual. So of course other commenters weighed in and told her she was damaged and probably had a bad experience. Bingo card. And we countered those narratives, and then Eric came back. And he said, "What I said, and I stand by it, is that asexual people of either gender have a right to do or not do whatever they choose. It just so happens that the vast majority of people find sex both desirable and highly enjoyable. That's a simple fact of life, neither good nor bad by itself. And the vast majority of people, both male and female, will reject any relationship in which sex is not a regular feature. An asexual person is simply not going to be an appealing mate for someone who craves sex. There's no point getting offended about that. Just accept that a man who loves sex is a very bad fit for an asexual woman, and a woman with a high sex drive is a very bad match for an asexual man. Have I said anything controversial or offensive yet? I don't see it, but feel free to set me straight. If Clara wants a man who will be content with cuddling and conversation, I wish her good luck finding one. But such a relationship holds absolutely no appeal for me. I wouldn't take her to a psychiatrist and try to change her. I'd just state unequivocally, this is not a match made in heaven for either of us, and walk out forever. Any sane male with any kind of sex drive should say, I hope you find the guy you're looking for, but it definitely isn't me. Even if Clara was willing to compromise with a hypothetical mate by, say, having intercourse once a month, that sounds like a terrible deal. For all concerned, a compromise that makes both parties unhappy is worse than a one-sided relationship. In a one-sided relationship, at least one person is happy. Life without sex would be no fun for most men, and sex with a woman who treats it as an unpleasant chore is no fun either. Those are the only compromises available. I repeat, you don't have to change. I honestly don't care whether you ever have sex." So I replied, "You're generalizing, and that's the problem. Not your belief that sex is important to most people, and not your comment about refusing to enter a romantic relationship with someone who doesn't. Your generalization. That's the issue. No need to claim we're getting offended because you're saying something you believe is indisputably true. We're correcting your misconceptions. Asexual people, yes, are pretty rare. And presumably, so are the people who would be willing to date them if they are not also asexual. But you need to stop reinforcing the belief that men who enjoy/love sex are categorically excluded from being able to have relationships with asexual people. And please, please stop insisting that the only sane response for a man with a sex drive is to walk away from romantic relationships with asexual people, especially since you appear to know so little about asexuality that you think it depends on sex drive and libido. Sanity is not something we grant only to people who share our values and prioritize sex in our relationships in the same way we do. We're not asking you to change your values. We are asking you to A, stop speaking on behalf of other people on what they will and won't accept in their relationships, and B, educate yourself on this topic, because you're not equipped with enough knowledge about what asexuality even is to be qualified in dispensing advice or perspectives on what people whose lives it affects should do. And I did get one more response, but it was by someone listed as anonymous, so I don't believe it was the same guy. And the style is a little different also, but somebody commented, "Seriously, get real," as the subject line, and this is their response. It's not generalizing to say that most people would have no interest in an asexual relationship when you say asexual people, yes, are pretty rare, and presumably so are the people who would be willing to date them if they are not also asexual. Do you see that? Do you see it's not generalizing when you've admitted it? People that enjoy/love sex simply are not interested in a relationship with someone that doesn't want to have sex or treats sex as a chore. It is, by definition, sane for a sexually active person to leave an asexual relationship, as staying in the relationship and expecting a different outcome would be what we call insane. And here's my reply. It absolutely is a generalization to say all male people with a sex drive would be unhappy in a relationship where they can't have sex with their partner. I personally know people who have relationships with asexual people and are not asexual themselves. You are speaking for them and pretending your opinion on the matter is fact, and that it is the baseline truth for every single man with an average or above average sex drive. It's amazing that you characterize these relationships as necessarily containing people who treat sex as a chore, when what I'm saying is that there are multiple ways to satisfy all partners' intimacy needs on terms that are mutually agreed upon. Again, I personally know people, yes, real people, no matter what you like to say about getting real, who desire sex, but claim it is not the deciding factor in who they have a relationship with or who satisfies their desires. It is not for you to say that these relationships cannot work, do not work, or are inferior to other relationships because they involve less common approaches to intimacy. It's definitely offensive to make broad statements describing people you don't know as insane. My admission that these arrangements are rare is not the same thing as admitting that they cannot work or do not exist. Asexual people are rare, but at 1% of the population, that means there are millions of them. There are more asexual people than people with breast cancer. And we still know that can happen, and screen for it in case it does. Similarly, yes, the people who have relationships with said people are also rare. It's very silly to characterize my discussion of relative rarity as if rarity renders it insane if it happens. When asexual people are 1 in every 100 people, and not all of them do have relationships of this nature, or relationships at all, it is not ridiculous to point out that the people who date them are also rare. The key word is rare. Not impossible, not non-existent, and not even all that vanishingly rare, considering how many people who enjoy sex have outright told me that sexual compatibility isn't even in their top 5 when considering long-term relationship necessities. These aren't people who are being pressured by asexual partners to give up sex. They're people who enjoy sex and nevertheless don't consider it the cornerstone to their relationships. You're just going to have to accept that some people are that way. Some of them date asexual people. It happens. And some of them actually find it really offensive that people like you often speak for them, uttering phrases like, "No sane person with a sex drive would date someone who doesn't want sex." It is attitudes like yours, reinforcing the idea that people are literally insane if they are non-asexual and would date an asexual person, that makes the world more hostile and more difficult to navigate for romantic asexual people. Some partnered people are kinky and are happy to do their kinky activities with each other even if they don't have sex. Some partnered people have more than 2 partners, and the ones that feel like having sex do so when an asexual partner might not. Some partnered people enjoy sex but want to stay partnered to a person even if they don't have sex. Some partnered people use toys instead of other types of sexual enjoyment or penetration. Some partnered people prefer self-stimulation and aren't desperately, sadly trapped in a sexless relationship. Some partnered people have a high sex drive, but don't feel their partner has to be the one to satisfy it for them to feel emotionally fulfilled. Some partnered people are asexual, but enjoy some aspects of sex. Sexual activity that is not intrinsically desires can still result in wanted experiences. I know partnered people of all these descriptions who are in happy long-term relationships, including marriages. And last time I checked, people who have compatible sexual desires still break up all the time or have unhappy relationships. Sex is not some magical relationship glue that is the only and or most important thing to hold people together. They get to decide what they value. You do not get to decide for them. And though you can value what you want in your relationships, please avoid reinforcing the damaging notion that compromises of the sort I have described are always about secretly depriving a sex-desiring partner of the most important thing. It is not the most important thing in the world to some people, even if they do enjoy it. It is horrible to literally classify empathetic, mature relationships that people settle on their own terms as indicative of mental illness. That's where that thread closed. And I just want to reiterate at the end, in case somebody lost it in the message there, in all the verbiage, that everybody that's in a relationship needs to decide what their needs are, and if their needs are not getting met, then you can change some aspects of it or break the deal. You can decide. I mean, there's nothing shallow about saying, I do need my main romantic partner to be sexually attracted to me. I mean, if that is one of your deal breakers, and if you don't have that, then you can't be with the person, that's fine. The problem is when you say there just aren't any people out there that would be with an asexual person if they like sex. Because it ignores both the fact that not every person who likes sex requires sex in their relationships and is going to get all bitter and snotty about it and treat their partner badly or walk around acting like, they're being deprived. Or that it underestimates how many asexual people do like to have sex in their relationships. Those people absolutely do exist. They are a minority in our community, but they're not impossible. So, I mean, just like maybe the ideal for a person who desires sex would be to be able to have sex with their partner, it's not an absolute requirement for everyone. And just like maybe some asexual people will say, my ideal would be having sex 0 times, 0 days out of the year, they might be okay with sometimes, that not happening. They may be kind of neutral about sex, or they may enjoy being able to have sex with their partner. So it kind of goes both ways on that. And to talk about relationships like you don't understand that those relationships sometimes have these other options, it also just ignores the great diversity in the asexual community. And it completely ignores the existence of types of intimacies that are not sexual, types of intimacies that may include physical intimacy that isn't about penetration, and it ignores that some people are polyamorous or ethically non-monogamous. So, I mean, there's just so much diversity, and in the asexual community especially, a lot of us have focused on that a lot, have looked at the options available to us, and it's really depressing that sometimes people who just know so little about it will come into the comments of an article and be like, I have to tell you about how things work, because the only way I can possibly see this is there's a man somewhere who's not getting sex, and I have to speak up for him because, you know, I can only relate to him. And I mean, even though that this person was emphasizing that it's not just men, and was emphasizing that everybody's cool with making their own decisions, he didn't seem to be aware that there are some mixed orientation relationships that are not just himself. He's allowed to make his own requirements for what he wants in a relationship, and he's not probably going to have a lot of trouble finding somebody who desires him the way that he desires them. I mean, his situation is the one that is the most common in the world, a heterosexual, hetero-romantic relationship. So, you know, for him to come in to a much more nuanced conversation about a marginalized sexual orientation, where people who have been having a lot more nuanced, a lot more diverse conversations about sexuality than he has ever thought possible, that he thinks that we need to hear his perspective again. You know what I mean? That's, I don't know, sadly kind of typical. And while I'm grateful that it wasn't nasty and it wasn't too condescending, you know, it still equals out to a dangerous mindset that unfortunately a lot of people in the world have. And they can't help but seeing it as asexual people not having a realistic understanding of what to expect in the world, or worrying about somebody getting trapped into a sexless relationship. And I'm like, well, what's stopping them from asserting their needs? Like, they're backed up by the status quo. I don't think that they'll have a lot of issues. You run into these people out there who seem to think that because there has been an increase in awareness about asexuality, that we somehow have all this power to control people, and that we're going to trap people in these relationships, and then they won't be able to get out, and they'll be sentenced to a miserable life of no sex. And I'm like, no, actually it's the other way around, where by and large, for most of history, people like us have felt like we don't deserve any kind of romantic attention, or we don't deserve happiness or partnership because we have this thing that is being presented as if it's a flaw. And yeah, we still definitely do not have the power of the status quo behind us at this point, just because, you know, we are getting a little bit more awareness out there. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. I feel like if this video was passed around in the wrong parts of the internet, my comments would yet again fill up with people who are just like, hey, but sex is really important and you don't get it because you're asexual. We need to tell you about sex and its importance. Like I don't live in the world, you know, just... It's really amazing how many of them think I haven't heard their side, when I've lived inside a world that's just saturated with their side, almost to the exclusion of everything else. And they think I need to hear it again. I don't, and probably neither do you. So, that will wrap this letter up, and I will come back with another one next month. Thanks for watching.